What if the Queen's final words didn't offer peace, but revenge? In a stunning twist that has sent shockwaves through the royal world, Prince William has just read aloud Queen Elizabeth II's sealed last will, and it changes everything. The Archewell Trust, the financial lifeline of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, has reportedly been seized under the late Queen's directive, effectively cutting the couple off from the royal fortune, leaving them blindsided and penniless. Sources say Meghan was visibly shaken, while Harry sat in stunned silence. Why did the Queen strip their access? What secrets did she leave behind? And how did William become the enforcer of her final wishes? Stay tuned, this story is far from over. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It was just after 10:15 a.m. at Windsor Castle when the heavy mahogany doors of the private reading room creaked open. Inside, a thick silence clung to the air as a select group of royals took their seats at the long, oval-shaped table. What they were about to hear had been kept under the tightest of locks and keys, hidden from public view, family speculation, and even palace whispers. It was the late Queen Elizabeth II's final will and testament, a document that had been drafted, revised, and sealed away with the precision only a monarch of her caliber could orchestrate. But nothing, no briefing, no rumor, no personal intuition, could have prepared Prince Harry and Meghan Markle for what came next. Across from them sat Prince William, the heir apparent and now the undeniable center of power within the British monarchy. He held the sealed parchment with both hands, his jaw clenched, his face a tight mask of unreadable resolve. Every eye in the room was on him as he slowly broke the wax seal that bore the insignia of the Queen. The atmosphere was heavy with history and anticipation. William's voice, calm but deliberate, began to read. What followed shook the room to its core. In what can only be described as a seismic revelation, the late Queen had made a series of decisions that would ripple across the monarchy, media, and world stage. Central among them was an unflinching clause concerning the Archewell Trust, the non-profit foundation and income-generating engine spearheaded by Prince Harry and Meghan Markle following their 2020 departure from royal duties. According to the will, effective immediately, full control of Archewell's governance and financial operations would be transferred to the Crown Estate, pending further restructuring. The trust, a key component of the Sussexes' post-royal independence and a public symbol of their self-determined identity, had been severed at its very core. The reading continued. Details emerged not just about the Archewell Trust, but about the Queen's final sentiments toward the ongoing tensions within her family. Notably absent from the language was the conciliatory tone the public had grown accustomed to from Buckingham Palace over the past several years. Instead, the will laid bare a stark truth. Elizabeth II had harbored grave concerns about Harry and Meghan's trajectory, their use of royal branding, and their repeated divergence from royal tradition, duty, and discretion. By the time the reading concluded, Prince Harry sat in stunned silence. Meghan's lips were tight, her arms crossed, a hard-to-read glint in her eyes betraying a mixture of disbelief and contained fury. There would be no public photos of this moment, no official palace statements for the press. But what occurred inside that room was monumental. Not only had the Queen posthumously redrawn the financial boundaries for Harry and Meghan, but she had also effectively dismantled the scaffolding of their media empire. One that had been built on philanthropy, celebrity partnerships, and a carefully crafted narrative of independence and purpose. This was not just a legal maneuver. It was a final, calculated move in a long unfolding chess match between the monarchy and its most rebellious modern members. But what led to such a decisive blow? To understand the magnitude of this moment, one must retrace the turbulent journey that brought the House of Windsor to this crossroads. From the glowing wedding in 2018 that captivated billions across the globe to the bombshell Oprah interview in 2021, Harry and Meghan's royal arc has been anything but predictable. Their decision to step back from royal duties in early 2020, coined Megxit by the press, set off a global conversation about institutional racism, royal protocol, and generational conflict within the monarchy. And yet, for all the headlines and high-profile interviews, there remained an unspoken question. How would the Queen, England's longest-reigning monarch, a woman shaped by duty, wartime resolve, and generational tradition, ultimately judge her grandson's path? Now we know. The Queen's will wasn't just a legal document. It was her final speech. A speech made not from a throne, not during a Christmas broadcast, but from beyond the grave, crafted in privacy, wielded in silence, and unleashed with surgical precision. And make no mistake, this wasn't about money. This was about legacy, about structure, about the invisible lines of authority that run deep beneath the royal surface. The Archewell Trust, while publicly billed as a philanthropic engine, had also become a commercial lifeline for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Its brand partnerships, media deals, and global campaigns underwrote their new lives in Montecito and kept them active in the public eye. Now, with control seized by the Crown, that infrastructure was in limbo. Even more devastating for the couple was the stipulation that any future use of the Sussex brand for commercial gain, under the umbrella of Archewell or any successor entity, would require prior royal review and explicit written consent. In essence, the Queen had set in place the ultimate check on their autonomy. It was a shocking endgame move, and it was deliberate. Throughout her reign, Elizabeth was often described as cautious, conservative, and conflict-averse. But what many outside the palace failed to grasp was her mastery of timing. She didn't act in haste, but when she moved with finality. Her decision to publicly remove Prince Andrew from royal duties in the wake of the Epstein scandal was one such move. This, now, was another, and the implications couldn't be more profound. For Harry and Meghan, the Queen's will represents not only a material loss, but a reputational blow. An indictment from the very matriarch who once welcomed Meghan into the royal fold with open arms and personal warmth. Sources close to the palace say the Queen had grown increasingly distressed in her final years over the couple's media offensives, feeling that they weakened the monarchy's cohesion and disrespected the family's private code. Still, few believed she would go so far as to block their financial independence posthumously. The Queen did just that. According to royal insiders, this decision was not made lightly. It involved months of legal consultation, private briefings with senior advisors, and even discussions with Prince William, who, according to multiple sources, was made aware of the plan shortly before the Queen's passing. His presence during the will's reading was not accidental. It was strategic, a signal to all in attendance, and perhaps to the world, that the future king endorsed the terms without reservation. For the institution of the monarchy, this moment signals a turning point. Gone are the days of ambiguity regarding Harry and Meghan's dual status, half in, half out of the royal machine. The Queen's final wishes make clear that there will be no more blurred lines. You are either inside the walls of Buckingham Palace or you are out, and being out comes with consequences. Of course, none of this has yet been confirmed publicly. As of this moment, no formal press release has acknowledged the will's contents. The palace, consistent with its age-old playbook, remains tight-lipped. But leaks from court insiders, corroborated by trusted royal correspondents and legal observers, leave little room for doubt. The Sussexes have been financially cut off. Their non-profit empire has been neutralized, and the power once afforded to them by virtue of their royal connection has been reined in, perhaps permanently. As the dust settles from the dramatic reading, questions abound. Will Harry and Meghan challenge the Queen's will? Can the terms be contested legally? And what does this mean for the broader public perception of the Sussexes moving forward? One thing is certain, this isn't just a family dispute. It's a royal reckoning, and the world is watching. Let's now dive into the origins of the Archewell Trust, the story of how it came to be, and why the Queen, so revered for her restraint, ultimately chose to pull the plug in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle first announced their decision to step back as senior members of the British royal family in January 2020, the public was stunned. The carefully worded statement posted on Instagram suggested a desire for a progressive new role within the institution, one where they could continue to support the Queen, but also earn their own income and pursue their own passions. It was an unprecedented move. No other senior royals in modern history had attempted to forge such a hybrid role. And at the heart of their future plans lay a vision that would eventually materialize into something far more powerful and lucrative than anyone initially understood, the Archewell Foundation. But Archewell wasn't born in the spotlight. Its genesis began in the shadows of controversy, broken relationships, and media battles. As the couple relocated first to Canada and then to the United States, there was little clarity about what exactly they would do outside of royal duties. Stripped of their HRH titles and prohibited from using the Sussex royal brand, Harry and Meghan needed a new identity, one that preserved their global recognition while distancing them from the very system they had chosen to walk away from. In April 2020, as the world plunged into a global pandemic, paperwork was quietly filed in California for the formation of Archwell Inc. Named after the Greek word archi, meaning source of action, and their son Archie, the organization was billed as a nonprofit focused on cultural change, compassion, and community. But from its earliest days, Archwell straddled a complex line, part charitable platform, part commercial enterprise, part media vehicle. It was this hybrid nature, idealistic yet entrepreneurial, that would both elevate the brand and eventually attract scrutiny from Buckingham Palace. Within months of its formation, Archwell began forging high-profile partnerships. Multi-million-dollar deals with streaming giants Netflix and Spotify brought global attention. The couple's first Netflix production, Heart of Invictus, centered around Harry's work with wounded veterans in the Invictus Games, signaling an attempt to align their media output with humanitarian themes. Meanwhile, Meghan's podcast, Archetypes, aimed to dismantle harmful gender labels. A topic deeply personal to her own experience as a biracial woman navigating both Hollywood and royalty. By late 2021, Archwell was more than just a foundation. It had become a full-fledged content and advocacy brand, with staff that included seasoned executives from Silicon Valley, Hollywood, and Washington, D.C. The organization's official website described its mission as unleashing the power of compassion in communities across the world. But behind the scenes, tensions were mounting, not just with the British press, but with the Crown itself. Sources close to the royal household began to voice quiet concern. To some senior aides, Archwell represented a moral contradiction. How could the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, no longer working royals, continue to leverage their titles and connections to build a media empire? The palace had made its position clear in public statements that Harry and Meghan were loved members of the family, but not representatives of the monarchy. Still, their projects frequently included references to their royal background. Their charitable initiatives were often seen through the lens of their high-profile wedding, and the press continued to call them by their former titles, reinforcing the confusion. And then came the Oprah interview. Broadcast to millions around the globe in March 2021, the CBS special was a watershed moment. In it, Harry and Meghan made explosive claims about racism within the royal family, neglect from palace officials, and the pain they endured behind palace walls. The interview sent shockwaves through the monarchy, sparking public debate and intense media scrutiny. But it also did something else. It positioned Harry and Meghan not just as former royals, but as victims of an archaic institution. And that positioning became a central part of Archwell's brand story. Over the next 2 years, Archwell expanded its scope. The organization funded mental health initiatives, supported COVID-19 vaccine equity, and announced philanthropic contributions to causes as diverse as women's rights, media literacy, and disaster relief. Their charitable giving was real, but their strategic communications were even more deliberate. Every move, every partnership, every release was tightly managed by PR teams and brand consultants. The Sussexes were building something not just charitable, but sustainable and profitable. By 2023, Archwell had become a multifaceted ecosystem. It consisted of the Archwell Foundation, the nonprofit arm, Archwell Audio, focused on podcasting and digital storytelling, and Archwell Productions, the content production wing in partnership with Netflix. Estimates suggested that their combined deals could reach upwards of $100 million over several years. For a couple who had once declared their desire for a more private life, they were now more present in media and public discourse than ever before. However, while Archwell's visibility increased, its clarity did not. Critics began to question how much of the foundation's funds were going to actual charitable work versus operational costs. Public tax filings revealed modest charitable disbursements in contrast to the vast income from media partnerships. Skeptics saw it as a nonprofit in name, but a content house in practice. Admirers, on the other hand, argued that Harry and Meghan were reimagining philanthropy for a new age, blending storytelling, advocacy, and business in a way that could reach global audiences more effectively than traditional models. Inside Buckingham Palace, however, the mood was far less generous. Senior courtiers viewed Archwell as a branding vehicle masquerading as a charity. While they couldn't legally stop Harry and Meghan from using their names or forming organizations, the palace maintained a growing dossier of instances where the Sussex brand had crossed informal lines, using royal associations to elevate commercial projects. Invoking their status while making political or controversial statements, and engaging in media campaigns that undermined the monarchy's image. Behind closed doors, the Queen was briefed regularly. By the summer of 2022, as her health began to falter, Queen Elizabeth was said to have requested a private audience with her legal counsel and Lord Chamberlain. It was during these meetings, according to insiders, that discussions around Archewell intensified. The Queen, ever the constitutional monarch, knew she could not directly regulate her grandson's private ventures. But she also knew the power of estate law, of inheritance, of legacy. If the monarchy could not control Archewell in life, it could in death. What emerged from those meetings was a codicil, a final amendment to her will that would only come into effect upon her passing. This codicil included 3 key provisions. First, that all financial inheritances from the Queen to Harry and Meghan be placed in a restricted trust, pending royal oversight. Second, that the Archewell Foundation's status as a charitable enterprise be reviewed by an independent royal committee. And third, that the couple's use of royal titles in association with any commercial activity be subject to legal challenge by the Crown Estate. These provisions were not leaks. They were guarded in vaults, stored in safes, and locked behind legal protections until her death. But now, as the world begins to learn what was inside the Queen's final will, the intention is becoming clear. Elizabeth II sought to protect the monarchy from what she saw as its most unpredictable external threat. Not an invading force, not a political scandal, but the media-driven empire built by her own grandson and his American wife. The decision has opened a fierce debate around power, privacy, and the definition of royal duty. Supporters of Harry and Meghan argue that they were forced out of the monarchy and had every right to create their own path. Opponents insist that their actions have blurred the lines between royalty and celebrity, using the prestige of the crown to negotiate commercial power. But for Queen Elizabeth, it appears the issue was never about personal feelings, it was about preserving an institution. She may have loved Harry, as any grandmother would, but she loved the monarchy more. Archewell had become, in her eyes, a symbol of the very risk she had spent her entire reign defending against, the collapse of duty into spectacle. Now, the battle over Archewell is no longer one of branding or strategy. It is a legal and moral contest between the past and the future. Between a monarch's final wishes and a couple's relentless ambition. The question remains, will Harry and Meghan fight this? Can they survive without the Archewell structure as it stands? And what does this mean for their public image, their charitable aspirations, and their family relationships? As we move to the next chapter, we will examine how the will's terms are being implemented, what legal paths exist for challenge or compliance, and how the world is reacting to a queen's final strike. The British monarchy has always operated with a meticulous level of discretion, especially when it comes to matters of estate, inheritance, and internal governance. The wills of senior royals, especially monarchs, are usually sealed from public access for generations. The last time a royal will caused public controversy was in 2002 following the death of the Queen Mother, but even then, details were largely speculative. However, in the case of Queen Elizabeth II, a secret codicil appended to her will has now erupted into a full-blown transatlantic controversy, sending shockwaves through both the royal establishment and Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's California-based enterprise. According to multiple corroborating insider accounts and legal filings now emerging in the public domain, the codicil, added in the final year of the Queen's life, was both specific and strategic. While the core of her estate followed the expected traditions of passing lands, assets, and ceremonial artifacts to King Charles III and other immediate family members. The codicil stood out for its laser-like focus on the Archewell Foundation and the financial standing of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The 3-pronged codicil was crafted with the assistance of both palace legal advisors and constitutional scholars. At its heart, it appeared to be the Queen's last attempt to place boundaries around a growing force she believed was capitalizing on royal status while simultaneously rejecting the responsibilities that come with it. The first provision directed that any inheritance meant for Prince Harry would not be distributed directly, but placed into a restricted trust with third-party oversight. The language reportedly used in the codicil emphasized deferred distribution contingent on royal compliance, a phrase that immediately raised eyebrows among legal experts. In essence, this trust would only be unlocked under conditions set by the Crown, conditions yet to be fully disclosed to the public. but which are believed to include a ceasing of all use of royal branding in business ventures and active disengagement from politically sensitive causes. The second part of the codicil turned its attention to the Archewell Foundation itself. While Harry and Meghan had registered Archewell as a charitable organization in the United States, the Queen's codicil asserted a right to challenge the authenticity of its charitable status based on its ties to the royal family. Legal analysts argue that this clause opened the door for a parliamentary review or even an international audit, under the premise that any nonprofit bearing royal ties should be held to specific ethical and transparency standards. Sources within the Cabinet Office confirmed that a special intergovernmental working group has been discreetly established to explore this jurisdictional gray area, as Archewell operates primarily under U.S. law but holds global influence due to its founder's royal heritage. The third and perhaps most controversial aspect of the codicil was a provision asserting that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex could be legally challenged for using their titles in connection with commercial endeavors. While this may appear symbolic, it carries serious implications. Though Harry and Meghan were allowed to retain their Duke and Duchess titles after leaving royal duties, they were explicitly instructed by the palace not to use HRH in professional or public-facing contexts. However, this instruction was not backed by legal enforcement mechanisms until now. The Queen's codicil suggests that a new legal path has been created, authorizing the Crown Estate to initiate action in British or international courts if it is determined that their titles are being used to promote for-profit ventures or mislead the public into thinking their work is sanctioned by the monarchy. Legal observers note that this is a historic move. Never before has a royal will included such far-reaching stipulations aimed at reining in members of the family after their departure from official duties. The fact that this codicil only came to light due to a complex dispute over transatlantic assets, particularly around the valuation of Windsor-held trusts intersecting with U.S. based tax obligations, has only added fuel to the fire. Documents reviewed in connection with these financial investigations show that lawyers representing the estate of Queen Elizabeth had been in quiet negotiations with representatives of Archewell since early 2024. These discussions were initially framed as routine inheritance reviews, but took a more adversarial tone once the codicil's language was invoked. Meghan's legal team reportedly pushed back against the assertion that the Crown could influence a U.S.-registered charity, arguing that there were no enforceable treaties or bilateral legal frameworks that would allow British law to reach into American nonprofit infrastructure. But British lawyers countered with the argument that the unique status of the Sussexes and their constant invocation of royal imagery and connections placed Archewell in a class by itself. The legal complexity has brought in players from both sides of the Atlantic. Former UK Supreme Court justices, American tax attorneys, nonprofit watchdog groups, and even United Nations consultants have been consulted. What is emerging is a legal maze centered on a fundamental question. Can a monarch's final wishes override the sovereign independence of a family member who has renounced their official role but still carries global influence derived from that monarchy? Prince Harry, for his part, is said to be shaken but defiant. According to friends close to the Duke, he feels deeply betrayed by what he perceives as a final act of control from a grandmother he deeply loved and admired. He has reportedly described the codicil as a posthumous punishment for daring to be free. Meghan, ever more pragmatic, is said to be exploring legal options, including rebranding Archewell or restructuring the couple's business endeavors under new entities unconnected to the royal family. Their legal team is currently drafting a countersuit challenging the enforceability of the codicil under both UK common law and international treaty agreements. The palace, however, remains resolute. Statements issued through Buckingham Palace's communications office have carefully avoided direct confrontation, but have emphasized the Queen's commitment to preserving the dignity, clarity, and neutrality of the Crown. Senior palace aides have gone further in private, describing Archewell as a well-constructed engine of influence dressed in philanthropic clothing, suggesting that the monarchy had long feared the brand's ability to undermine royal protocol while maintaining a veneer of nobility. And then there is the role of King Charles III. While some hoped he might use his authority to soften the Queen's stipulations, insiders indicate that Charles has chosen to uphold his mother's final directives without amendment. This is likely due to two reasons. First, to protect the institution from appearing weak or inconsistent. Second, to ensure that the power of the monarch's final wishes, especially when made public, are honored without challenge. Charles, it seems, has no intention of appearing to roll back a decision made in the twilight of his mother's reign, especially when that decision was so clearly designed to shield the monarchy from future reputational harm. All this has created a deeply precarious situation for Harry and Meghan. As the legal dust begins to settle, they are left with few options: restructure Archewell to comply with the codicil's provisions, risk a legal showdown that could embroil them in years of international litigation, or find an entirely new platform from which to advocate their causes, one that makes no reference to their royal titles or legacy. The implications are enormous. Should Harry and Meghan choose to fight the will in court, they may risk not just financial penalties, but an irreversible rupture with the rest of the royal family. And while public sympathy may be divided, the legal precedent such a case would set could have lasting consequences for the entire royal institution. For the first time in modern history, the monarchy's ability to regulate the behavior of its former members through estate law is being tested. The codicil was never meant to be public, but now that it has become more than a legal document. It is a final gesture of authority from a monarch who spent 70 years mastering the art of soft power. It is Elizabeth II's final commandment, carried from the grave, seeking to bind those who sought to escape her orbit. As the legal process unfolds and public debate intensifies, the world watches with fascination and unease. Will Harry and Meghan comply, challenge, or circumvent the codicil? And if they do fight, will the institution that shaped them prevail against the rebellion it unintentionally birthed? The lawsuit Prince Harry filed in early 2025 to claim his full $10 million inheritance from Queen Elizabeth II's estate has sent legal shockwaves through both sides of the Atlantic, shaking the foundation of what many believe to be a stable, albeit strained, post-Megxit status quo. For the first time in living memory, a senior royal has formally taken legal action against the estate of a monarch, initiating a high-stakes legal offensive that cuts through centuries of unspoken royal protocol. This section dissects the motivations, legal arguments, courtroom developments, and potential consequences of this landmark case. Harry's legal team filed the claim with the High Court of Justice in London under a veil of urgency and secrecy, hoping to keep it out of the press until proceedings matured. But leaks emerged within days, detailing that Harry was not just requesting access to the funds, but actively contesting the validity and enforceability of the secret codicil appended to the Queen's will. In his formal complaint, Harry's lawyers argued that the codicil placed arbitrary, retroactive, and unconstitutional conditions on inheritance rights, effectively turning a personal bequest into a tool of coercion. According to the filing, Harry's legal team framed their position around three key points. First, they argued that the conditions imposed by the codicil violated his rights under UK inheritance law, which, while allowing testators significant freedom, generally disapproves of overly punitive or controlling stipulations. His lawyers claimed that the codicil crossed into testamentary overreach by seeking to dictate behavior in perpetuity rather than outline simple qualifications for inheritance. Secondly, they alleged that the codicil was crafted under undue influence by senior royal advisors who had an interest in maintaining the status quo and curbing Harry's independence. Finally, the lawsuit contended that the inheritance was framed in private discussions between the Queen and Prince Harry as unconditional and irrevocable, and that these verbal agreements constituted a moral contract, if not a legal one. The initial hearing in March 2025 was a dramatic affair. Prince Harry did not attend in person, but his presence was felt through the high-powered legal team he assembled, which included barristers known for challenging institutions and precedent. In court, the Queen's estate was represented by seasoned royal legal counsel, flanked by constitutional scholars and experts in probate litigation. The estate's argument centered around the Queen's sovereign rights as a private citizen to allocate her estate as she saw fit, even if she had once expressed different sentiments verbally. They emphasized that a monarch's personal will does not require parliamentary approval, and thus her final wishes must be honored as long as they do not violate statutory law. Adding complexity to the case was the fact that part of the $10 million inheritance resided in offshore trusts and intergenerational funds that predated Elizabeth's reign. This means that not all assets were directly held in her name at the time of her death, and accessing them required navigating a tangled web of financial structures spanning Guernsey, the Cayman Islands, and several European financial institutions. The codicil, according to court records, included specific directives to these financial bodies that Harry's access should be restricted pending compliance verification, essentially freezing the assets in legal limbo. In the second phase of the hearings, the question of title usage was brought into sharp focus. The estate's legal team submitted evidence showing that Archwell's promotional materials, media contracts, and public appearances frequently relied on Harry's status as a duke and member of the royal family. These findings were used to bolster the argument that the Queen had reason to believe her grandson was monetizing royal associations in contradiction to agreements made when he stepped down as a senior royal in 2020. The estate's attorneys argued that this formed the basis for her codicil's requirement that no funds be distributed unless the Sussexes ceased using royal titles in any capacity that could be construed as commercial. Court transcripts reveal that Harry's attorneys vigorously countered this line of reasoning, asserting that title usage was not inherently monetization and that the monarchy itself had blurred those lines for centuries. They presented documents showing Prince Andrew's continued use of Duke of York despite his official disgrace, as well as examples of royal-sponsored charities that operate for public influence and soft power. The crux of their argument was that Harry was being unfairly singled out for political reasons rather than for genuine legal or ethical violations. Observers note that one of the most electrifying moments of the hearing came when Prince Harry's attorney read aloud portions of a handwritten letter reportedly given to him by the Queen in the months before her death. The letter, authenticated by handwriting experts, expressed deep love for her grandson and made reference to his safety net she hoped would provide him peace and dignity, no matter what. The legal team used this letter as evidence of the Queen's original intent, an emotional argument that moved several in the courtroom, though its legal weight remains uncertain. Public reaction to the lawsuit has been deeply polarized. In the UK, tabloid headlines ranged from outrage to curiosity. One front page blared, "Harry sues the crown, a royal betrayal," while another asked, "Is this the price of freedom?" Across social media, the reaction was equally split. Some supported Harry's fight as a stand against an antiquated system that uses wealth and title as levers of control. Others accused him of entitlement and hypocrisy, arguing that someone who rejected the institution should not now claim its spoils. In the United States, where Harry and Meghan have cultivated a broader audience, legal analysts weighed in on the implications of the suit. On American news networks, several commentators noted that while Harry may not win the case in its entirety, the lawsuit itself serves a symbolic purpose. By filing, Harry is signaling that he refuses to be held hostage by posthumous royal control, and that he is willing to break further with family tradition to assert his autonomy. Behind the scenes, the pressure is reportedly immense. Senior royal aides are said to be furious at the public airing of what was meant to be a private matter. King Charles, while maintaining public silence, is understood to be privately disappointed and dismayed, seeing his son's legal move as an escalation that could damage the family's unity and global standing. He has reportedly instructed his advisors to prepare contingency plans for public fallout, including potential press statements, media interviews, and even private arbitration offers to resolve the dispute without further courtroom drama. Meanwhile, legal experts have begun speculating about possible outcomes. The most likely scenario, according to insiders, is a court-mediated settlement where Harry receives partial access to the inheritance under revised terms, possibly including the reorganization or rebranding of Archwell. However, if the court rules in favor of the estate and upholds the codicil in full, it could set a precedent that reinforces the monarchy's ability to manage the financial and reputational affairs of former members through estate law, a precedent that could affect other members of the royal family in future disputes. The case has also reignited broader debates about the financial operations of the monarchy. With billions in real estate, investments, and art holdings, the royal family's wealth has long existed in a realm of secrecy and privilege. Harry's lawsuit, by forcing the courts to examine how these funds are managed and distributed, could open doors to future demands for transparency. Already, several MPs from across party lines have begun calling for a parliamentary inquiry into royal finances, particularly in light of this legal battle. As the next hearing looms, Prince Harry remains largely out of public view, avoiding interviews and maintaining a carefully managed image through Archwell's official channels. Meghan has not commented publicly, but is believed to be deeply involved in strategy meetings and crisis management planning. Friends say the couple are aware that they are playing a high-stakes game. one that could either vindicate their decision to leave the royal fold or entrench their isolation for years to come. What remains certain is that this lawsuit represents a pivotal moment in modern royal history. It is not merely about money or titles. It is about power, autonomy, legacy, and identity. It is about whether a grandson's right to define his own life can stand against the long shadow of a grandmother's final decree. The moment news broke that Prince Harry had filed a formal lawsuit against the late Queen Elizabeth II's estate in an effort to claim his $10 million inheritance, Buckingham Palace descended into a maelstrom of crisis meetings, damage control strategies, and high-level interventions. What began as a tightly held legal maneuver quickly spiraled into one of the monarchy's most turbulent internal upheavals in recent history. With the media circling like vultures and public opinion hanging in delicate balance, the senior members of the royal household found themselves forced to address a deeply uncomfortable reality. The royal family's internal rifts had burst into full public view with all the subtlety of a courtroom brawl. Behind the wrought iron gates of Buckingham Palace, a sense of betrayal permeated the atmosphere. According to palace insiders, the first reaction was shock, not necessarily at the lawsuit itself, but at the sheer audacity of the move. While many had suspected Harry might contest certain elements of the Queen's final arrangements, few within the inner circle truly believed he would take the crown to court. This wasn't just a family dispute. It was a public referendum on the moral and legal authority of the monarchy's internal financial apparatus. That made it political, scandalous, and existential. King Charles III reportedly received word of the lawsuit while in a private meeting at Clarence House. According to staff familiar with the proceedings, his reaction was one of subdued devastation. He read the legal briefing in silence, his face tight with disappointment. The monarch, who had just begun a slow process of recovering public favor following Queen Elizabeth's death, now faced a deeply personal and public challenge. It wasn't just that Harry had brought a suit. It was the symbolism of a son suing the legacy of a mother. Within royal tradition, this was nearly unthinkable. Within hours, a special convening of senior courtiers was called, including representatives from the Lord Chamberlain's office, legal advisors from Farrer and Company, and the Queen Consort Camilla's private secretary. The question on everyone's mind was not just what Harry wanted, but what would happen if he won. Such a victory would set off a seismic chain reaction, calling into question the monarchy's right to enforce behavioral conditions through inheritances and codicils. If Prince Harry could legally override the Queen's final stipulations, then so might others in future generations. It would open the floodgates to contested royal wills and family-wide litigation. The mood in those first few meetings was reportedly grim and defensive. Palace lawyers assessed the strength of the codicil and the will's validity. Constitutional experts were brought in to analyze the implications of the case on the Crown's sovereign immunity, even though this was technically a personal estate issue. What became clear, however, was that the case could not be dismissed as a private family matter. The media narrative had already spiraled out of control, and the public appetite for royal drama remained insatiable. There was no containing the fallout. Queen Camilla is said to have taken a more combative stance during the early stages. According to multiple sources, she argued that Harry's lawsuit amounted to blackmail disguised in legal terms. In private conversations, she reportedly described Harry as entitled beyond reason and believed that his actions were rooted less in financial necessity and more in ego and vindication. Camilla, who herself had once been the subject of intense public scrutiny and scandal, was quick to point out how damaging it would be for the monarchy if the courts ruled against them. Her influence, growing steadily since Charles ascended to the throne, meant her opinion carried significant weight in shaping the royal response. Meanwhile, Prince William maintained a far more restrained posture. Though visibly upset at the news of the lawsuit, those close to him said he insisted on keeping the focus on protecting the institution rather than responding emotionally. He reportedly told his aides that the worst possible outcome would be to drag the feud into the tabloids through counterattacks or unofficial leaks. William's team advised a policy of strategic silence, a tactic the monarchy had used effectively in previous crises. But there were limitations. In this case, silence could be interpreted as guilt or weakness, especially since Harry was controlling the narrative through court filings and sympathetic media coverage in the United States. Princess, and one of the monarchy's most respected and trusted figures, played a surprising but vital role during this crisis. Sources reveal she was among the first to suggest engaging Harry directly, possibly through a private emissary, to explore non-litigious resolutions. She viewed the court case not merely as a legal challenge, but as a symptom of deep-seated alienation that had gone unaddressed for too long. And, known for her pragmatism and bluntness, is said to have remarked in one private meeting, "If you treat a man like an outsider for long enough, you shouldn't be surprised when he acts like one." Her suggestion was not immediately embraced. Some within the palace saw any direct outreach as capitulation. But as the days wore on and headlines grew more vicious, the logic of Anne's proposal began to sink in. A discreet back-channel effort was reportedly attempted through mutual friends, former staff members, and at least one unnamed third-party mediator. However, Harry's legal team was said to have rejected the overtures, insisting that the matter had already progressed too far for informal resolution. Trust, by that point, had all but evaporated. As the public furor mounted, the palace communications office found itself in a bind. On the one hand, they needed to maintain the monarchy's stoic facade, rooted in centuries of tradition and reserve. On the other hand, they couldn't allow Harry's version of events to dominate the headlines unchallenged. Thus began a careful campaign of strategic leaks, background briefings to favored royal correspondence that subtly painted Harry's actions as selfish and unprecedented. Terms like dishonorable, provocative, and disgraceful began appearing in tabloids, carefully attributed to anonymous palace aides. But not all reactions within the household were condemnatory. Several junior staffers and younger members of the royal apparatus privately expressed sympathy with Harry's frustrations. One aide, speaking on condition of anonymity, confessed that many within the household believed the monarchy had handled the Sussex departure poorly from the beginning. There was no flexibility, no compassion, just rigidity and protocol. "That's not how you keep a family together," the aide said. These internal divisions revealed that even within the palace walls, opinion was far from unanimous. Publicly, the royal family continued their usual calendar of events, walkabouts, charity engagements, and official duties, all while the lawsuit loomed like a thundercloud on the horizon. In a moment that many media analysts described as symbolically charged, King Charles made a surprise visit to the royal courts of justice for a previously scheduled charity event. Photographs of him shaking hands with judges and court officials were widely circulated, with headlines drawing ironic contrast between royal tradition and legal challenge. Behind the scenes, contingency planning kicked into high gear. One scenario under discussion involved establishing a new family council composed of senior royals, trusted legal advisors, and external mediators that could resolve future disputes before they escalated into public spectacles. Another option explored was a complete overhaul of the palace's internal communication strategy, aimed at modernizing how the monarchy engaged with younger, more digitally savvy audiences. Both options pointed to a deeper realization: the institution was facing an existential moment, and old methods were no longer sufficient. As the weeks wore on and Harry's legal case gained traction in the media, morale within the palace hit a notable low. Several veteran staffers reportedly tendered resignations, citing exhaustion and emotional burnout. The Lord Chamberlain's office initiated internal reviews of estate-related protocols, attempting to identify vulnerabilities that Harry's lawsuit may have exposed. For many, it felt as though the very walls of Buckingham Palace had been breached, not by an enemy, but by one of their own. Perhaps the most poignant reaction came from palace archivists tasked with managing the Queen's personal correspondence and legacy documents. According to reports, these archivists were dismayed that private letters and notes, long safeguarded as sacred family relics, were now being introduced as evidence in open court. The sense of violation was palpable. One official remarked, "It's as though her memory is being put on trial. Not just her words, but her intentions, her love, her hopes for reconciliation. It's painful beyond words." In the court of public opinion, Buckingham Palace has found itself fighting an uphill battle. While many Britons still support the institution and view Harry's lawsuit as misguided, a growing segment of the population, especially among younger generations, expresses sympathy for his cause. Polling shows that public trust in the monarchy has dipped slightly, particularly among those aged 18 to 34. In response, palace advisors have quietly launched listening sessions and focus groups, hoping to recalibrate the monarchy's image for a changing world. Despite the turmoil, the royal household remains, as always, determined to weather the storm. But this particular tempest is unlike any before. It is not merely a scandal of behavior or protocol. It is a confrontation over legacy, truth, and power. And no matter the outcome in court, The ramifications will be felt for years, perhaps even generations to come. As the lawsuit filed by Prince Harry against the late Queen Elizabeth II's estate broke into public view, an unprecedented wave of reaction swept across the globe. Newsrooms from London to Los Angeles scrambled to verify the story, and within hours, headlines blared from every screen, device, and newspaper stand. Prince Harry had taken legal action to claim the $10 million inheritance he believed was unjustly withheld due to his separation from royal duties and strained relationship with the crown. What had once been whispered as family tension exploded into a full-blown public controversy, captivating audiences worldwide. The initial response from the British public was one of disbelief. The notion of a royal prince suing the estate of the most revered monarch in modern British history struck many as both audacious and deeply unsettling. Talk shows, morning radio, and online forums lit up with intense debate. Was Harry justified in seeking his inheritance, or had he crossed a line that no royal should dare breach? For some, it was a brave act of standing up for one's rights. For others, it felt like the ultimate betrayal of family and tradition. In the hours following the news leak, Twitter, now rebranded globally as X, trended with hashtags like #Harry versus the Crown, #Royal Lawsuit, and #Queen Elizabeth Legacy. Memes flooded the platform, some mocking Harry, others defending him, and some questioning the very foundation of monarchy. One particularly viral post read, "Only in 2025 do we see the grandson of the Queen dragging her estate through court like a Netflix drama." Another user quipped, "Who needs The Crown Season 7 when we've got this playing out in real time?" In the United States, where Harry and Meghan had long since built their post-royal lives, the media reaction was far more sympathetic. Talk show hosts on both the left and right seized the moment, offering polarizing takes. On one end, some hailed Harry as a bold challenger to outdated institutionalism. On the other, critics accused him of exploiting his royal roots for financial gain while claiming to reject royal life. Still, the lawsuit gave American media what it thrived on: celebrity, conflict, and royalty, all wrapped into a single, explosive package. CNN dedicated an entire 2-hour special to the developing story, featuring legal analysts, royal historians, and even a body language expert who dissected Harry's recent public appearances. Over on Fox News, commentators criticized the prince for undermining the sanctity of family, while pointing to the lawsuit as further evidence of Meghan's alleged influence. Across the Atlantic, the BBC took a more restrained tone, offering a detailed analysis of royal succession law, while Channel 4 aired a hard-hitting investigative segment examining whether royal inheritances were truly governed by merit, legacy, or favoritism. In Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, Commonwealth nations with deep historical ties to the British monarchy, the lawsuit reignited long-standing debates about republicanism. Political commentators and constitutional scholars weighed in on whether the controversy might hasten calls to sever formal ties with the monarchy. The Sydney Morning Herald ran an editorial titled, "A House Divided: What Prince Harry's Lawsuit Means for the Future of the Commonwealth." Meanwhile, in Canada, the Toronto Star published a scathing critique that questioned how a family so embroiled in internal strife could continue to symbolically represent unity and stability. In London, public protests began to coalesce outside both Buckingham Palace and the High Court. These were not mass movements, but they were highly visible and well documented. One group of royal loyalists waved British flags and held signs reading "Loyal to the Crown" and "Harry, come home, but don't sue." A smaller counter-protest organized by younger activists displayed banners that said "No inheritance without justice" and "End royal immunity." The two groups were often separated by police lines, but their arguments echoed in interviews broadcast across every major UK channel. On YouTube, influencers and cultural commentators quickly capitalized on the moment. Reaction videos, legal breakdowns, and conspiracy theories drew millions of views. One popular British YouTuber released a 45-minute analysis titled "The Royal Rift: Why Prince Harry is Suing His Own Grandmother's Legacy," which featured dramatic reenactments and sharp commentary. Across platforms, the conversation expanded beyond just the lawsuit. It became a flashpoint for global discussions about privilege, family, institutional accountability, and the cost of speaking out against power structures. TikTok, too, became a battlefield of opinion. Short-form videos explaining royal wills, Harry's past interviews, and Meghan's public statements began to dominate the For You page. A trending soundbite from an old Oprah interview with Harry where he referenced feeling trapped in the system, was used in thousands of videos juxtaposed with headlines about the lawsuit. Young creators, especially Gen Z users, largely leaned in favor of Harry, framing the case as a fight for autonomy in a world that still places inherited power above individual justice. Royal biographers and historians were in high demand, offering televised retrospectives of Queen Elizabeth's reign and how she handled past family discord. Many recalled the Queen's quiet resolve during the 1992 Annus Horribilis and her decision to remain calm even amid Charles and Diana's collapse. Comparisons were inevitably drawn between Diana's struggles and Harry's rebellion, with some suggesting that history was repeating itself, this time not with tabloid headlines, but through legal filings and court hearings. The Church of England, which still maintains a ceremonial role within the monarchy, issued a carefully worded statement urging grace, understanding, and humility among family members during difficult times. While not directly addressing the lawsuit, the message was widely interpreted as a gentle rebuke of the public spectacle. Senior clergy quietly feared that such internal disputes, aired so publicly, could erode respect not just for the monarchy but for traditional institutions across British society. Beyond media and public opinion, legal scholars weighed in heavily on the implications of the case. At the center of it all was a deeply sensitive issue: the legality of placing conditions on inheritances, particularly within royal contexts. Several universities held panel discussions and published white papers examining whether a monarch's personal estate should be subject to standard inheritance laws or afforded special protections due to its national significance. The idea that Queen Elizabeth might have made Harry's inheritance conditional on personal conduct raised ethical and constitutional questions that extended far beyond one family. In the days that followed, law students across the UK were reportedly assigned Harry's case as a debate topic in mock court settings. Professors encouraged students to argue both sides. Was it justifiable to use an inheritance as leverage for loyalty? Or was this a violation of individual rights? Some even questioned whether royal assets, gained through public service and funded partially by taxpayers, could ethically be distributed as private rewards or punishments. While the courtroom battle had yet to formally begin, the court of public opinion was in full session. Petitions appeared online both supporting and condemning the prince. One petition titled "Support Prince Harry's Right to Justice" garnered over 150,000 signatures within a week. Meanwhile, another petition called "Protect the Queen's Will, Preserve Her Dignity" reached nearly 200,000 signatures and demanded legal reform to prevent similar cases in the future. These petitions quickly made their way into media coverage, further inflaming public emotions. Amidst this, Meghan Markle remained largely silent, her absence from the public discourse creating a vacuum that was filled with speculation. Some believed it was a strategic move to avoid accusations of interference. Others suggested it was a calculated effort to keep the focus on Harry alone. Either way, the speculation didn't stop. Her past statements about feeling unwelcome and unsupported by the royal institution were replayed, dissected, and recontextualized in light of the lawsuit. Hollywood's reaction was no less dramatic. Celebrities who had publicly supported the Sussexes in the past were suddenly being asked to comment. Talk show hosts who had once applauded Harry's break from royal life now found themselves navigating a more complicated narrative. Was Harry still the relatable, progressive royal? Or had his quest for independence veered into entitlement? No clear consensus emerged, but the story had undeniably become global entertainment. Booksellers reported a spike in sales of royal biographies and tell-all memoirs. Titles about Queen Elizabeth's reign, Diana's struggles, and Harry's own book were flying off shelves. Publishers saw an opportunity and began fast-tracking new releases analyzing the implications of the lawsuit. Documentarians rushed to repurpose archival footage and release updated versions of royal exposés. It was, as one network executive put it, a golden age for royal scandal content. Public trust in the monarchy, which had already been under strain following the Queen's passing and various controversies involving Prince Andrew, now faced another blow. Polling data showed a dip in approval ratings for the royal family, particularly among younger demographics and in urban areas. For the monarchy, which has long relied on public goodwill for its continued symbolic authority, these numbers were a warning sign. Through it all, the legal process moved forward. Every new court document, every statement from Harry's legal team, became the subject of fevered speculation and analysis. Even the judge's facial expressions during preliminary hearings were discussed in the press. The lawsuit had transcended its legal framework and become a cultural moment, a global reckoning with tradition, legacy, and familial accountability. Yet perhaps the most striking part of the public response was its emotional intensity. Whether for or against Harry, people weren't neutral. They were invested. They argued over dinner tables, in office break rooms, and across social media feeds. It wasn't just about royalty anymore. It was about identity, justice, and the complex web of expectations placed upon those born into power. In a world increasingly defined by questions of privilege and systemic imbalance, Harry's lawsuit had become a mirror, reflecting not only a fractured family,